Before diving into this podcast, I wanted to do a short preamble. We all face challenges and make mistakes in life, and some are more consequential than others. But the true measure of a person lies not in their missteps, but in their ability to learn, grow, and redeem themselves through courage and perseverance. And today's conversation is a profound example of the transformative power of self-reflection, accountability, and an unwavering commitment to personal growth. It demonstrates that even after falling into life's darkest valleys, it is possible to climb back through sheer determination and the support of loved ones. Our guest, Wayne Boatwright, will share his extraordinary journey from being a successful attorney to the harsh realities of incarceration, and ultimately to a path of redemption and purpose. His story is one of resilience, fatherhood, and the unyielding strength of the human spirit. As you listen, you may encounter moments that challenge your perspectives or your beliefs. But I encourage you to approach this with an open mind and heart, for within Wayne's narrative lies a much, much deeper message that we all have the capacity to transcend our past regressions and to rebuild our lives in service of something much greater than ourselves. This is a tale of profound lessons, of confronting harsh truths, and of the power of love and family to guide us through our darkest hours. And it is a reminder that second chances are possible and that each of us has the ability to author our own redemption story. So join us on this transformative journey and prepare to be inspired by the resilience of the human spirit and the infinite possibilities that await when we embrace growth, accountability, and the bravery to change. So let's dive into the conversation. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with Wayne Boatwright, a father, attorney, and an essayist whose life took an unexpected turn that led him to the infamous San Quentin prison. His story is one of profound lessons, redemption, and the unwavering power of family. Wayne Boatwright's life reads like a rich tapestry, interwoven with threads of triumph, adversity, and profound transformation. His journey from the prestigious corridors of Ivy League academia to the stark confines of San Quentin prison encapsulates a narrative of resilience and redemption that is both compelling and deeply human. Wayne, once a high-flying attorney, experienced a dramatic shift in fate that led him to confront the most challenging aspects of his character and society. His story is not just about the fall, but more importantly, about the courageous journey back to grace. In the quietude of his cell, Wayne embarked on an introspective journey, wrestling with his past decisions and their consequences, leading to profound personal growth and a renewed sense of purpose. As a father, Wayne faced the daunting challenge of maintaining a connection with his children, a testament to his unwavering commitment and love. This aspect of his journey speaks volumes about the power of the human spirit to overcome barriers and maintain the bonds that matter most, even in the bleakest circumstances. Emerging from his trials with a wealth of insights and a renewed mission, Wayne has become a vocal advocate for justice reform and a beacon of hope for those facing similar adversities. His experiences have endowed him with a unique perspective on the flaws and potentials of the justice system, driving him to work towards meaningful change. And today, Wayne shares his journey and the lessons learned along the way, not just as a tale of personal redemption, but as a call to action for societal transformation. His story is a powerful reminder of the capacity for change, the importance of resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Wayne, welcome to the Transcendent Minds podcast.
Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
You were once a successful Ivy League educated attorney with a promising career and a loving family, and a single tragic incident changed the course of your life forever. Can you share with us the circumstances that led to your incarceration, how you coped with the initial shock of being behind bars?
Yes, and I will get into that. I love the term that one of your recent guests had of being a paradigm pioneer. I'm hopeful that as the audience listens, we'll be able to share that paradigm shift that has occurred because of the tragedy of my own doing. Many people have tragedies throughout their life. I look at what's going on in Gaza right now, and it's heartbreaking, just as it was on October 7th in Israel. Those people didn't choose those tragedies, most of them. I chose mine because in my case, I was an alcoholic. I was drinking and driving, and I took a life with my crime. Prison was a perfectly appropriate societal demand for any citizen who has violated the standards of society and broken laws. That resulted in going to San Quentin. Now, when I was in San Quentin for over 6 years, I never disclosed I was an attorney, let alone went to Cornell Law School. I just said I was a business guy from the startup community. That was the story that I told. But the process that I went through was one of trying to understand how I could be that person, that monster to another family, and destroy not one family with my crime, but in reality, two families. It was not only my victim was torn out of her life and her family suffered because of that, but I was torn out of my family. And less than 6 months into my sentence, my wife of 14 years and mother of my two children asked me for a divorce. So that being torn out was legalized, you might say, with our divorce as well. So the consequences to my children, who were 5 and 7 when I committed my crime, and 6 and 8 when I went to prison, there's no way to calculate the damage that was done to those young, innocent children by my actions. But owning that is, I think, the first step to that process of growth and understanding. The way I would characterize that is that life doesn't happen to us, life happens for us. There was something I had to learn, and I couldn't learn it for whatever reason. So a terrible, horrific, unimaginable price had to be paid by others so that I could wake up, so that I could accept not only what I had done and who was the person that did that, but make the realization that I had the power to change and not stay that alcoholic that had hidden his drinking. Was a functional alcoholic, right? I was a member of my church. I was professional. I was a father. I was a husband. I thought I had bad days, but that's not the reality. The reality was I had good days every once in a while. I was hiding my bad days. I was hiding from myself. So the ability to accept that and face that was the beginning of that journey. Now, I have to be honest, when you go to prison, that isn't what you think of at the beginning. Prison is a little different in the US. You have basically 3 levels. You have the local or county jail system, then you have a state system, and you have a federal system. So I was involved at the local and the state level. When you go to prison, all you worry about is you're in a state of hypervigilance, as is everyone there, and you just want to try to keep yourself safe. Much of my mental bandwidth, my emotional reserve was spent on how do I stay safe in this environment. But once I had established credibility in my community and in prison, and I do consider it my community, I'm still very active in the criminal justice impacted community, not just the men who've gone to prison, but their families and their victims. I try very hard to contribute to that community so that it can be of use to society and not continue to be selfishly taking the actions that are crimes in our society and cause harm. I got to that stage, but it took a while. It took a while to get to where I could actually start working on myself. That doesn't mean I didn't recognize the monster I appeared to others. But I couldn't work on that at the beginning.
You needed to have a crisis to reveal what's crucial and of value in your life. That's the wake up call. From my own experience, a family member who was an alcoholic and nearly killed somebody drink driving, and he went to jail for a while, but it woke him up. It woke him up, and he became a sponsor in AA, and he's been 30
Mm,
years sober. Now he helps a lot of people. When I was in LA, I went to an AA meeting to get the experience, and my gosh, it doesn't have any prejudice. There were
mm,
CEOs there. There was a guy who lived under a bridge. There was a lady who couldn't stop having men visiting her apartment every night. It's not about the actual crime itself. And okay, you've paid the price for it, but it's the process of who you're becoming. Who are you becoming? We're becoming all the time. We're changing all the time. We're aging. So who are you becoming? Whilst you were serving your sentence and you talked about the additional challenge you faced when your wife asked for a divorce, and I believe
mm.
it was just 4 months into your imprisonment, many would have given up on their role as a father in such a situation. And from what I understand, is that you chose a different path. What motivated you to remain an active part of your children's lives? And how did you navigate the obstacles?
There's no greater honor or privilege that I know of than to be a parent, and in my case, to be a father. I had 2 children, and I'll be honest, I saw many men inside who either had severed ties with their family, either voluntarily because they were ashamed or as a consequence of the family feeling that it could no longer trust that individual and therefore wouldn't interact with them at any level. I knew men who had spent 40 years in prison, many of which had never had a visit, for example, while they were in prison, had lost that connection. I took my responsibility as a father seriously. I had damaged the tapestry of our relationship with my children, but I hadn't destroyed it unless that was what I allowed to happen. So my goal was to begin reweaving that tapestry as soon as I could. You mentioned we grow older. Part of the process of that is to accept one's own journey and to recognize what caused the tragedy that I had caused. What was it that led me to think that drinking and driving was an appropriate action? I had to find that out. I had to find that out for 2 basic reasons. First of all, so that I could be the parent that my children deserved. I never had a father in the home. I was raised by a single mother, for example. So I didn't have a role model to follow. But I knew that my children, for positive or negative, had me as a role model. So how would I demonstrate to them, not just acknowledgement of what I had done, but how I would then face the consequences of my own actions and learn from them and demonstrate that I was still a member of society, of my community, of their family. That was essential for me. It was something I took very seriously and was the foundation for any recovery I could experience. You had mentioned AA and the importance of it as an organization, and it does focus a lot through what I call the 12 steps on people on that journey to help them acknowledge who they are and how they got there, the consequences of their actions, and then what they could do to serve society and others, to help others on that journey that they were on. I had altered the path of my children's lives. They were no longer children of a happily married couple living in San Francisco doing well. They were now the children of a convicted felon. And trust me, that comes out. I was there for a little over 6 years. And to her eternal credit, their mother honored her commitment to have them come visit me while I was in San Quentin, the whole sentence, even after our divorce. But there was a period of 18 months where my son wouldn't visit me because he had transferred to a new school. And when the students found out his dad was a convict and incarcerated, they belittled him. They bullied him. They made fun of him. And he was angry, he thought. And at his developmental level, anger might be the right word to use. But of course, the real emotion was one more of shame and embarrassment. But he didn't have the developmental level to understand that. So his response was he couldn't visit me. He was mad at me for what I had done that caused that shame and embarrassment that he had to experience. The consequences are, they don't end with the act. They don't end with the incarceration. They're lifelong. I think the message I was trying to teach to my children is that it doesn't have to be an open wound. One can stop being a victim and become a survivor of those actions. It can become a scar. It never heals perfectly. You have been scarred. You have been changed. They have suffered, but it doesn't have to stay an open wound. So my journey was to find a way to help my children accept the reality of their experiences in their lives and heal, to become survivors. They would never go back to who they were before. I have to tell you, my daughter just graduated from high school. So I was in prison for 6 years, 3 months. I've been home about 5 years. And since I've come home, I've spent my personal focus and energy to reconnect with my children as much as possible. My daughter just graduated high school, and she was elected vice president of her school and therefore was asked to give a senior speech. She mentioned in that speech her gratefulness at her friends for helping her deal with the fact that her father had been incarcerated. You want to put a stake into a person, have a daughter have to say that in her speech. But she's a survivor, and the scars are there, but it's not an open wound, I don't think. Evidenced by the fact that she was the captain of her school's golf team and that she had straight A's and that she's going to a wonderful university. She's passed through those challenges and accepted this new reality that was forced upon her by my actions. And I worked very hard to help her through that process, as I did with my son, who's 20 years old now and attending university. We got over those 18 months where he didn't visit me, and we reconnected, and he came back to visit me in prison on a regular basis. I have literally daily contact with my children, even though they don't live on the West Coast. I'm in San Francisco, and they're both going to school back east, only home for the summers. But we have literally hundreds of communications every week. In fact, I like to count how many there are in the week before. And even though I visited with my children for part of that time, we still had 137 communications via email, photos, texts over that time. And that's evidence of an active relationship. It's not perfect. I've destroyed their trust. So regaining that, it will be a lifelong journey, a lifelong process. But we're on that path to regaining that trust for each other. And I'm very grateful to them being open to allowing me to stay in their lives and be the best father I can be. Not the father they always need, because I was gone for much of their developmental phases. Again, they were only 6 and 8 years old when I went to prison. So I missed much of their developmental level, being able to live in their home. When I came home, I was in a different apartment. I wasn't with them. But I'm immensely proud of my children and take my role of being a father very seriously. That empowered me on my journey of introspection and healing. That wasn't the only energy source for that commitment to change. I had a unique energy source, one that most people will never have. That source was murder. I took a life, Peter, from this world. And I had an immense responsibility to learn to control my impulses and the coping mechanisms I had developed to deal with my challenges that were unhealthy, that led me to becoming an alcoholic. And having such a sense of pride as a defense mechanism to protect myself, I told myself, look at how good I am. I'm smart, I'm educated, I'm a professional, that I thought it was okay to drink and drive. I had to learn to humble myself and not use pride or alcohol as coping mechanisms for the challenges of my life and the things that I had to face. And to have the courage to do that introspection and that work wasn't just the responsibility of being a father and being an example to my children. It was the responsibility that I had to learn to control this power to take a life that I had exemplified by my actions. I had to make sure I would never be that person again. I wouldn't put others at risk like that again. And I think the reason I'm talking with you and to your audience and do other podcasts is I don't want others to have to go through what I had to go through to learn my lessons. I hope they will be able to use the example of our conversation and my journey to wake up from the coping mechanisms they're using to hide from the challenges that they face, whatever they may be, whether it be addiction or another form of coping mechanism that I was using. By the way, I do contend that people misconstrue many of these terms that we use on a regular basis. What is an alcoholic? What is an addict? That isn't the problem. Being an alcoholic isn't the problem. Alcohol was a coping mechanism for me to deal with the real problem. It helped me, in my mind, unhealthily. All right, it wasn't the right way to do it, but it was a coping mechanism that I was using. You have to get beyond that coping mechanism and face the real issue that you are using alcohol or pride or sex or smoking or eating, whatever your coping mechanism may be, to face those challenges. I didn't have the energy to do that myself, evidenced by the fact that I took a life with my actions. But I was going to learn from that. I was going to use the power of life-taking that represented to have the courage to face my real problems, which lay underneath the coping mechanisms of alcoholism that I was using instead of facing my challenges. That's the way I would characterize it. And I would contend that much of the self-help groups and the mental health professionals misconstrue their responsibilities, and they focus on coping mechanisms instead of focusing on the underlying problem, which is what you have to deal with if you're able to actually heal. So that's what I've worked on. And that's a different view. I look at your podcast, you have a lot of guests on who have very unique perspectives on the world and different ways of seeing how it works. We're all struggling to find the vocabulary to express the patterns that we're seeing in the world. So I'm using the vocabulary that I've found effective to express the patterns that I see in the world. Alcoholism isn't the problem. It's just the name we've given to the coping mechanism that we're using because we can't face the problem.
And nouns as well. It's not a verb.
Thank you. Thank you. You are the first person who understands that. Our language, the English language, takes out of our realm of comprehension the ability to change. We commit people to a permanent state because it's noun-based instead of verb-based in this instance. I think that's why AA exists, if we go back to that example. Because it's a noun-based language, they have to say you're always an alcoholic because it's a noun-based language and that's the mechanism that they use. I call it dancing to the 12th step. I don't do that because I don't consider my alcoholism to have been a permanent state. I do take my sobriety seriously. I don't drink anymore. I will never drink again is my commitment, not just to society, but to my children. And I have multitudes of opportunities to drink if I wanted to. Another term I like to use is that's a trigger. Something triggers me to use alcohol as a coping mechanism. And I think I've faced that issue, resolved that issue personally so that I no longer look at alcohol as a coping mechanism or a solution to whatever problems I'm facing. So I don't consider myself an alcoholic as our noun-based language requires. I had a problem with alcoholism and I recognized that problem could come back. And if I started drinking, I would snap back to that state of alcoholism instantly. It wouldn't be a slow progress as it was when I started my drinking. I agree with all those things that AA teaches, but I don't consider that noun appropriate for who I am. It doesn't define me as an individual.
When I was at the AA meeting, it dawned on me that you can express that you're an alcoholic, but to continually do that, you are encoding your neurology in such a way, create a state within you. States are free, but stages have to be earned. Otherwise, what tends to happen for many people, where there is a high recidivism rate, is they get triggered into reactivity because it's based on a historical mechanism that they haven't actually resolved.
That's right. That's right. I agree 100%.
They go round and around.
Yeah, I look at Matthew Perry as the example of that. famous actor, worth insane amount of money, known by everybody. He never got to deal with the underlying issue. So he would spend millions of dollars, go to rehab, I don't know how many times, to try to build a wall around. So I try to use metaphors and examples as rich as possible because I'm trying to communicate to something more than your conscious mind. I'm trying to communicate to that body-brain part of you that exists as well. And it sees things rather than hears or reads words. And so I try to use these rich metaphors. He had a trigger that once it was clicked, he would go back to his addiction. All of his work that he did was to build a wall around that trigger. He recognized it was a problem. I'm not saying that, but we're very intelligent human beings, and we can find a way to get past whatever wall we build. The goal is to dismantle the trigger and not use those defensive walls. He was never taught to find out the root cause of his maladaption, to face the trigger and dismantle it. He was taught to build walls around that. And I think many of the self-help groups and mental health professionals that we have focus on the addiction, focus on the coping mechanism, which is a maladaption, no doubt, but that isn't the problem. That is actually a solution to the problem. It's the wrong solution. It's a maladaption, but it's a coping mechanism. You have to face the underlying problem. You have to learn to do that. Unfortunately, many people don't recognize that. They're taught to focus all of their attention on their coping mechanisms and feel guilty about it rather than facing the underlying issue. By the way, this is going to take us far afield. I apologize. I'd mentioned pride. In my case, the first major coping mechanism that I developed to deal with the challenges I faced in my life as a child was I told myself I had to be better, faster, stronger. I was raised in what's called rent control housing, government housing. I shared a bedroom with my brother my whole life. I started working at 15 and a half because my family had no money. I bought my family's first car, I bought my family's first TV because I had a job while I was in high school and I earned money. And that engendered a sense of pride. Look at me, I'm doing it. And that had some good things to it, right? That defense mechanism, that coping mechanism of pride helped me. But as I matured, as I became an adult, that coping mechanism wasn't sufficient to deal with the new challenges that I faced as an adult. And so I developed a new coping mechanism. I started using alcohol. I didn't have to face the challenges and I didn't have to face the anxiety and the pain I was experiencing because the pride I had developed wasn't enough to overcome those challenges.
That became an unhealthy defense mechanism.
That's right. That's exactly the terminology I would use. It became an unhealthy defense mechanism. And I would hide my alcoholism, as many do, because that sense of pride required that I hide it. I wasn't able to ask for help, is the way to look at it. In the end, that's the way I would characterize it. I wasn't able to ask for help from mental health professionals. I wasn't able to ask for help from my clergy or my faith. I wasn't even able to ask my wife for help. I would try to hide my challenges and thought that was facing them when actually I was facing away from them and not dealing with them. I had to learn to deal with those things, and I'm grateful. This will sound crazy. I'm grateful that I was sentenced and went to San Quentin State Prison because San Quentin is a unique prison. There are over 30 prisons in the California system, and San Quentin is analogous to the Silicon Valley of criminal justice reform. I would contend. I was an attorney that worked in Silicon Valley, so I dealt with a lot of startups, dealing with a lot of creative people. I would contend that San Quentin has opened its doors to a myriad of different volunteer groups and nonprofits to come in and experiment, to be honest, with new ideas on how to help these men so that they don't recidivate. You mentioned the significant level. It's close to 70% of these guys go back to prison, for example. So obviously they haven't learned to face the underlying maladaptions that they have, and they repeat their crimes.
If you think about the conscious mind, you're subject to impressions. The conscious mind is subject to impressions. Now, those impressions go into your semi-conscious, which is like a filing cabinet. You may have experienced it when you're trying to remember something. You're saying, it's on the tip of my tongue. That's your files going searching for the file. But if you don't neutralize what's in the semi-conscious, it gets expedited into the unconscious, over which you have little or no control over. So repetition causes internalization. When you're in a cell Unless you push back the space to learn or study or do something else, you will repeat the same thing.
Until you learn. That's right.
But not only learn, but align to that learning. And then that becomes part of your basic constitution.
Yeah. And that's why these terms that I use as mechanisms, life doesn't happen to you, life happens for you. That changes your orientation. It
Yeah.
allows you to be open to change, to open to why am I repeating these actions? What is the underlying cause of it? I took that responsibility seriously and am grateful to San Quentin because I was able to participate in a number of these, we call them groups, but they're nonprofit organizations that are trying to convey some facet of life, some way of helping you. One of them, for example, was inside gardening. So it was trying to help people get in touch with the earth and with creativity. The power of that is that it helps you recognize the consequences of the destruction you could cause with your violence, with your crimes, with these other things. You protect these plants, that's teaching that unconscious and semi-conscious part of you the value of life in a way that you have hidden from. You've shut off part of your emotional self as a defense mechanism. And so how do you reconnect with that? And it might be the earth that helps you do that. Everybody has their own path and they have their own ways. Not only did I participate in these groups, even though I never disclosed I was a lawyer in prison, I became the managing editor of the San Quentin News, which was a newspaper that we printed in San Quentin. It has a circulation of 35,000 print copies we send throughout the California system. And we write 40 to 60 articles a month about the criminal justice system, restorative justice, and the work being done inside prisons to help people learn how to face the consequences of their actions and why they did them, and to become beneficial, useful citizens again, to become returning citizens to society, to be worthy of that, to learn to face those challenges that they have. So I was exposed to many more of these groups than just participating in them. I was directing as the managing editor the articles that would be written about all of these groups. And they could be anything. I look at it as 3 stages. You have the stage of introspection, try to understand yourself. You have to have the other 2 stages to work. And the next stage is some form of creative self-expression. I would contend, as a number of your guests have, writing a book is a form of creative self-expression. This podcast is a form of creative self-expression, right? We're able to put ourselves out into society and have society see us and respond to us as we present ourselves. And that could be being a musician. It could be being a gardener. It could be working. They're all forms of creative self-expression. But you have to get to the next stage, which is one of service to community, to help others on that path. Again, this podcast is a form of service. I do these podcasts as a guest. I'm an introvert, by the way. You wouldn't tell that necessarily from our conversation. But when we're done with this, I'm going to be useless for the next day or 2 because this is very exhausting for me. But this is a form of service that I do. I don't promote a book. I'm not trying to sell anything. I don't want you to hire me. This isn't self-promotion. This is a form of service in my mind. And I take service very importantly. I'm on the board of an organization called Man to Man. And at Man to Man, we try to teach fatherhood values and principles to the incarcerated, many of which never had a father themselves. But they are physically the father of children. And they need to learn to become a true parent, a true father, and to help those children on their journey. And that organization is one I take very seriously. I've been on the board of it since I got out of San Quentin, and I work very hard with that. One of the greatest accomplishments. So Father's Day is a couple weeks away in the US. I'm not sure when they celebrate it in UK, but we celebrate it in June. This year will mark the 3rd year in a row that both of my children have volunteered with me at an annual event we do in Oakland to celebrate fathers. We have bouncy houses and art creation and sports and hot dogs and popcorn and music and comedians that come to this event. We invite these fathers to bring their children that they may have been disassociated with, to have a reason to connect with them. Come to this event. It's free. You're going to get all this great stuff. But we want the children to see that their fathers are being celebrated as fathers. That is a possibility, that they can have that aspiration to be better fathers, and that we work to develop those tools with coursework with them to learn impulse control, domestic violence treatment, financial planning, which I run because I'm educated and I have financial intelligence that many of these men don't have. And so I want them to learn those skills. But that goal of using the orientation of fatherhood as the vehicle to motivate these men to change. Not just that they don't want to get caught, not just that they don't want to go to prison, but that they can actually teach and be a parent to their children. That inspiration, that orientation is what we focus on at Man to Man. And I'm very proud of it. And I'm more proud that my children have come the last 2 years and will come this summer as junior volunteers at the bouncy house and at the popcorn station and be there with me. It's for them, but it's also for all those other children and all those other fathers to see what's possible. That when their children become teenagers, they might also be willing to volunteer and to help, right? I want to be that example for them. And those kids have stepped up and have done that with me. I can't express how happy and the sense of love that gives me that they're willing to spend a Saturday with their father.
This is a rebuild. You're rebuilding your life in such a way where you're continuing to reflect on the importance of earning respect and not feeling entitled to it. You're also discussing the value of humility and being grateful for the opportunities that are afforded to you and the ones that you create. Because as we all probably know, that the antidote to being a victim is to be a creator. Otherwise, you slide down that greasy pole of development into victim consciousness as distinct from being a creator.
I like that. I like that. I told you about rich metaphors. I'm going to use the elephant for 2 of them that I think will fit with what you're doing, and hopefully it'll resonate with your audience. We live in a time where information has become limitless, frictionless, and free. We all can find out anything we want to find out in ways that wasn't possible even 10 years ago. There's a wonderful old Buddhist parable called The Elephant and the Six Blind Men. And if you're familiar with that, they all will touch a part of the elephant and think they've described the whole thing. This is a wall as they touch the side, or this is a hose as they touch the trunk, or this is a rope as they touch the tail, right? I think our world, because information has become limitless, frictionless, and free, we're all these blind men where we think we found the answer when the problem is much more complex, right? And so we need to be open to new ways of thinking. So your podcast and the guests you have use different vocabulary and different terms. I think Star Child was one, for example, not one that my techie world would use very often, but it's an example of vocabulary to try to be more oriented towards seeing a holistic view versus one facet. Jonathan Haidt, who's a former professor at NYU, very famous, written a bunch of books. He had one concept called the elephant and the rider. So I would contend your concept of the semi-conscious and unconscious versus the conscious mind is that example. The rider is our conscious mind, and we think we're in control. We're on top of the elephant. We're seeing everything's going on, but it's an elephant. You try telling an elephant what to do. That's the semi-conscious and unconscious existence. And we need to respect that and have access to it if we're able to have an impact on it. Because unfortunately, we're not actually rational. What we are is we're rationalizers, right? We try to excuse our actions. I did that with my alcoholism. Oh, I'm not that bad. I've had a couple bad days, but I'm fine. I'm a functional alcoholic. No, I was that bad. I took a life. I have ultimate evidence of just how bad off I was with my actions. The elephant, I couldn't control it. My conscious mind was rationalizing my actions. So that visual that we need to be humble enough to recognize we're riding an elephant, and that's not an easy thing to do. And we need to develop the skills and tools so we can have access to that semi-conscious and subconscious or unconscious existence and actually have some influence on it. And I think we fail at that as a society. So we're all struggling to find different vocabulary and tools, as many of your guests have expressed. Again, a paradigm pioneer. I love it. I love it. We have to shift our orientation if we want to accomplish the goals that we've set for ourselves.
When we understand natural laws, it's all encoded within us. From the Fibonacci series, if you look at a seashell, if you look at your fingers, you've got 3 parts to your finger. You've got conscious, semi-conscious, unconscious. You've got 3 parts to your arm, but you can only be in 2/3 of anything at one time. When you're awake, you're in conscious and semi-conscious. But when you're asleep, you're in unconscious and semi-conscious. If you look at a tree, you see the 2/3 of it. The 1/3 you don't see is under the ground. That principle is at play all the time. We are just not aware of it. And I'm very happy for you because life has not given up on you. It's still yearning to express and experience the full spectrum of existence through you. And by the interplay of matter, the interplay of energy, consciousness, and all phenomena, because you're one of the vessels through which the universe seeks to manifest and know itself.
I
And
like that.
this is a feedback loop.
Yes. Yes. My gosh, you're using a lot of my favorite terms. It is a feedback loop. And that feedback loop can be a balancing feedback loop or a reinforcing feedback loop, either positive or negatively, right? And sometimes you want a balancing feedback loop. It's homeostasis, right? Our body wants to be in balance. That's normal. But if you've got a maladaption, you might want to have a reinforcing feedback loop to get out of that maladaption. Or if there's something positive, you might want to have a positive loop that improves that ability, right? Feedback loops is a great tool, a great concept that I think people underappreciate. We need to create the space to recognize those feedback loops and then have the influence on them. So I mentioned I like to use rich metaphors. I'm going to force you to listen to another one. Sorry, I can't help myself. I love this.
Well, before you continue on the feedback loop, if you look at an F-16 or an F-35 jet, that has incredible feedback loops. Whereas a commercial airliner not do the things those fighter jets can do because they don't have the same feedback loops.
That's right.
Their flexibility is very different in terms of their responsiveness to whatever situation they come up against.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say one more thing before you continue is what comes to mind is that when I look at the night sky, I look at the galaxies because I love astronomy. We're all born from the quantum fluctuations of this early cosmos. So too are you.
And the supernovas of other planets.
Exactly.
Other suns.
Yeah.
That created the molecules and atoms that we became.
Exactly. Yeah. But we're all gestating within the womb of its potentiality. Life has not given up on you. Life has not given up on me because you are, I am, we are life's way of perpetually reinventing and exploring itself. In this rebuild, you are a universe waiting to be born. Your mind mirrors the underlying geometry of reality. It's an engine of perception and meditation. Your consciousness echoes the primordial fields from which all arises. It's an infinite essence float in finite form. Part of what we're here to do is to evolve, is to participate in the evolution of the cosmos with each emotion felt, each thought considered, each realization integrated. You birth an ephemeral phenomena into concrete experience. So that whole river of your being flows into the ocean of existence. And now you are embodying those truths.
I like that. And embodying them as evidenced by our actions, right? We're participating. And I think that concept of unity, we're all part of this process. And we all have our own unique perspective based on our genetics, our physical existence, our experience, our education. All of these things impact how we perceive this existence that we all share. We're all part of this community of life. And I seek to understand that and to participate in it at those three levels of introspection, creative self-expression, and service. All three of them occur at every time, at all times in our existence. I find a deep level of satisfaction in that exploration and in that discovery. And having the humility to recognize at each level of learning, we find out we know even less than we thought we did, right? So it's like a bubble. It's like a bubble. The outside of that bubble gets bigger as we learn more, not smaller. There's more stuff we don't know. We didn't realize we didn't know, right? As we learn and we grow, it causes a real sense of humility in us. And our goal in life, I think part of that process is to develop the psychological tools necessary to participate more fully in that existence. And I think one of the challenges our society faces is it focuses only on what it calls rationality or logic. as the number one tool. That tool works for a lot of things, but it doesn't solve everything. There are other tools that exist that we have to use. And I think a lot of the frustration that people face in life, most people know what they should do. Let's be honest. People know what is good for them, but they don't understand why they don't do it. Why did they eat another piece of cake? Why did they drink another drink? Why did they buy that bottle? Why did they take those drugs or whatever else that they may be doing? And they don't understand why, and they're frustrated by that, and they think they have no control over it. I would contend they're just using the wrong tools to try to deal with it. There are other tools they need to gain access to. I believe your podcasts are attempting to describe some of those tools. The 3 levels, for example, is a wonderful mechanism to understand we can only be in 2 of them at once. So we should be patient, but we should recognize where we are and learn to use those tools to make the world a better place, not make us better. To do of service is the way I look at it. I try to be that example for my children, that you can come back from whatever you've done and don't become bitter. Have a positive attitude about life. Celebrate life to the best of your ability. And trust me, financially, it's not what it used to be, right? I used to be an attorney. I'm disbarred. I now work at a catering company to generate most of my income. I'm serving people at events that I used to attend as a guest. That's humbling. Trust me.
You're experiencing the agony and the ecstasy, the alpha and the omega. To your point about why do we have that piece of cake and why do we continue doing those things when we know what's good for us? I think that there's a difference here. And you alluded to rationality as distinct from trans-rationality. On one level, there's the accumulation of intellectual knowledge about the world and one's place within it. And that constitutes a kind of conceptual cartography, mapping out the terrain of existence from
A map of meaning. I love
a
it.
map of meaning, but from a detached, rational perspective. Meaning is one thing, morality and mastery is another.
Mm.
We need to exercise morality and gain mastery in our lives. But underlying this is a deeper, more elusive form of knowing, that of direct lived experience and its internalized patternings that happen over the course of a lifetime. That's the domain of developmental knowledge. That's the shadowy imprints left by one's emotional, mental, spiritual, and psychological unfolding across the seasons of one's own personal metamorphosis. It's like a ghost haunting the hallways of consciousness. This subsurface of residue of previous selves that clings to our being, relentlessly shaping our agency, our perceptions, our conditioned responses, and our core sense of identity in ways that are both seen and unseen.
And positive and negative.
And neutral as well. That's the third thing.
Sure.
So
I like that.
There's a crucial difference between being affected by those ghostly presences versus remaining unaffected and free, that separates the unconscious role, the players that are lost in the fog of conditioning, from those who've managed to elevate their awareness above the vapors of past traumas and bias. But it's only rare beings who profoundly know themselves, explore their inner landscapes, but with ruthless honesty and confronted their phantom residents. This is about claiming your sovereignty or having self-authorship.
Yeah, I like that. I'm going to give you an example, and then I'm going to use a metaphor that I use daily for myself, okay?
Go for it.
So the example of those ghosts that we face that have more of an impact on us, especially when we don't even realize they exist, right? That gives them the power to do things we can't see. I was raised by a single mother and for much of that time with my grandmother, and they had both had horrific experiences with men in their lives, right? Alcoholism, beating, abuse, all kinds of things. For them, men could not be trusted. So they didn't date anybody, and everything they said about men was negative because that was their experience, their life. I can rationally say, I know all men aren't bad. That's fine. But when I look back on my life, especially my professional life, I recognize that the biggest shortcoming I had wasn't my intellect or my learning or my education or the work experience. It was that I could never accept a mentor to guide me because I had learned you can't trust men, not consciously, right? But that's all I heard my whole life. So I would never reach out or accept the invitation of somebody to be a mentor to help guide me professionally because I didn't consciously recognize I didn't trust men. But when I look at the consequences of my action, that blind spot is very evident that I didn't trust men, even myself, right? But especially the ability to have a mentor in my career. So that was a consequence of it. That ghost impacting my life in unseen ways, unknown ways, that now I look back, I can see. That's the example. The metaphor that I like to use is I burned down my psychic delusion house by my actions. And that house had been built up by all of these things. It had built up by my genealogy, my family history, built by my genes, my human existence, my mind body, my personal experience, my cultural embeddedness, right? All of these things built this psychic delusion house that I had built to protect my psyche and around myself. And I burned that down both with my crime and with my divorce, because my identity as a husband and a father were taken away, were destroyed by that divorce. The way I characterize my journey of introspection and the work I've done, I like to say beyond the groups, I did an amazing amount of reading. I like to say that I got hooked on ancient Greeks and dead Englishmen, which is my way of saying a lot of philosophers that I studied and focused on. But I characterize that as I felt I had an obligation to rebuild that psychic delusion house in a healthier way, in a better way, in a way that I could live within and participate in society and with my family in better ways. So much of that journey, much of what I think our discussion is about, is what are the tools, but also what are the components of that house? What are the planks and the windows and the roofs that we're going to put on our psychic delusion house to help us get through the storms of life that occur? Some of our own making and some merely tragedies. Again, to go back to where we started, those Palestinian children in Gaza are experiencing horrific things that they have no control over, have no responsibility for. That's a tragedy. But the Hamas members who went into Israel and killed people and took people, they have responsibility for their actions. They did those things, I believe, and should face the consequences of those actions. They need to rebuild that psychic delusion house that they live in so that it works better to serve the purposes of life, of their living, of their interaction with society and with their family and with their community. So I characterize myself as rebuilding that psychic delusion house. It's a work in progress. You're never done. There's always work that has to be done, right?
That requires a practical toolkit of understanding to service and build the foundations first. So you have strong foundations, but like an oak tree, it needs to be strong, but it also needs to be flexible so it can bend with the wind. Otherwise, it'll break. What I see in terms of your life and the rebuild of this house is that in dimensionally ascending the levels of lucid selfhood, your existential authenticity is now blossoming into a living work of conscious art. So no longer are you simply an actor being jerked about by unseen strings, but now I see you more as a master playwright, a director, an improviser, co-creating new possibilities with every breath and every minute that you have.
Thank you, Peter. I hope our audience has gained something from this conversation, either as examples that we've tried to provide, but also by these tools and metaphors we've discussed, that they may seek those themselves to better understand themselves through introspection, creative self-expression, and service. Is again the three parts that I see. I love that example. You can only be in two of them at once. That is beautiful.
What do you hope people will take away from your story, and how do you envision contributing to this transformation moving forward? I know you've done a lot already.
I would hope that even though pride and accomplishment were central to my identity and the defense mechanisms that I used that led me to alcoholism and the coping mechanisms and led to my crime, that they recognize that at some level I've accepted that and have the humility that I have to learn. I have to rebuild that psychic delusion house. I can't rely upon the old one that I was living in. And I seek to discover and use the different tools necessary for me to rebuild that psychic delusion house. Even though I think many tools are in common by all humans, we all have our unique experience. We all have our unique view of the world. Everybody may have different tools that are more effective or more important or more accessible to them. I would hope our audience would seek to discover more tools and different tools, both introspection to understand themselves, but then once they know where there might be an issue, what are the tools they can use to deal with that and not get frustrated that the one tool of logic and rationality can't solve everything, because it can't. There are other tools that we need to gain access to. I hope they seek those tools out and learn to use them and share them with others, either through creative self-expression or through service. That is our journey. We're all in this life together. My goal, my hope, my aspiration is that others can grow and learn and hopefully avoid the mistakes that I made. Don't lose the trust of your children. It's like a bucket that you filled up over a lifetime and you tossed out the trust water with your actions. And yes, you can refill that bucket if you fix the bottom so it isn't leaking, but it refills a drop at a time. Don't lose that trust of your children. And that trust, by the way, began literally at birth. I'm not talking about just the experiences they've seen you do as a parent. There is a level of trust that came when they were babies and you were changing their diapers and feeding them a bottle that's still part of them. Don't lose that trust. Preserve it. Try to use that as a way to access your role as a parent or your role as a mentor for others, whether it be as a teacher or an employer or as a supervisor or a coach. I think that is the aspirational goal I have for myself, to try to be better at that, to find those tools and find a way to share them and to demonstrate their use. Again, my children are going to come volunteer with me at this Father's Day. That's embodied experience right there, and one that I'm so grateful that they are willing to share their life and their time and with me. And I will continue to work to regain their trust for as long as I live. They deserve that. And I seek that, whatever pace they develop at, because it's a developmental level as well, right? They're still young. I don't know if that all makes sense, but that's the riff that came out of me. If we go back to the jazz example, that's my solo and I'll stick with it.
It's well said. Your story is one of tremendous importance, in my view, because it holds the potential to either allow your evolution to continue flourishing towards higher orders of awareness and existence, or to become a regressive force, hindering and disrupting the great currents that flow forth from the source. There is human emergence that comes through you, and that represents a sacred grant and grace, an opportunity from the creative powers that first sparked life into being. Just like a gardener nurtures a seedling with care, so too has your life been prepared and seeded for human skills to take root.
That's very kind of you to say. I appreciate that. I'm a seeker. I wish to learn and to grow and to be humble enough to not assume I know the answer. And I work at that every day.
Where can people find you?
Good question. As a lawyer by training, I tend to write more than I talk, believe it or not. And I've posted many of the tools that I've discovered and use and examples of my life on 2 different platforms. One is called Medium. The other is called Substack. They can find that on my name, and I'll send you the link if you want to put it in the show
Please
notes
do.
when we're done. I've moved everything that I write outside the paywall, so I don't want people to feel that they have to buy anything to access this. It's all free. It's all open. If there's anything there that inspires them to take action, then I would be grateful. But I try to describe in as much detail as possible my journey, both in prison as well as reconnecting with my children, as well as the service I attempt to do since I've come home.
How have you experienced today?
I'm surprised by your invitation to be open, what comes out of me. I didn't expect to talk about some of these things. I didn't anticipate that. And I'm grateful that you've invited me into your home, into your podcast home as a guest. It shows me I need to be guests more often and talk to more people, even if it's exhausting to me, to be honest. I would contend that what this has given me is the inspiration to continue to share my story with the hope that it'll be of value to others and that I can be of use. Because that's my goal, is for all of us to recognize life happens for us, not to us. There are things we need to learn and to be open to that learning. And then to share that through creative self-expression and service.
Here's a challenge for you. Apply to do a TED Talk.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I say that half disingenuously because about 4 people have told me that I should do that. And I just haven't had the courage to do that, to be honest.
You
But
need courage. Just need to be brave.
isn't that what we want? That's what I want for my children. I don't need them to be safe. I want them to be brave, not take stupid risks, but I want them to learn to be brave. And I should practice what I want for them as well. I should be brave. Thank you. I'll take that to heart.
When you create a safe space in your inner community, it becomes a brave space to have an active genesis of self-expression. So you create inner stability and outer equilibrium.
I like that. I like that. I will take that suggestion to heart because I find it to be genuine and authentic coming from you. I appreciate it.
You're most welcome. It's been really an honor and a privilege. And thank you for sharing your story, your insights, and being vulnerable by delving into some of these subjects that some may not talk about or feel too ashamed to talk about, but you rebuilding a stronger foundation with higher standards, better principles, and then look at what they connect to and what the significance of those will be and where it may lead you. And that is not you looking at the frame of where you've been, but looking through the frame of where you can go. It's unknown, it's uncertain, but you got to set your feet upon that path.